which is a bid'ah, clearly. No Sahabi did that. He clarifies that there are many things that one of the things that in logic, you build on premises and you move to a conclusion. The famous syllogism form, and you have different ones, categorical, hypothetical, disjunctive. These syllogisms are ways in which we determine if something's sound or not. Because you have 64 possible syllogisms, only 16 of them are actually accurate. And if you learn how to reduce an argument to a syllogism, you can determine whether it's a sound argument or not. I mean, this is one of the benefits of learning logic. But what very often people do is they do what's called qiyas ma' wujud fariq. It's making an analogical, reasoning analogically, but there's a difference that makes it different. And let me give you one example. Many people say, why is it that we can determine the prayer times by calendar and we can't determine the moon by calendar, right? Because we all use these prayer schedules. We go on to iPray.com or something, and we look the city we're in, and we click it on, and which is a bid'ah, clearly. No Sahabi did that, and yet people say, well, if we do that with the prayer time, and nobody seems to have an objection, why can't we do that with the moon times? Well, part of the reason is because first of all, لا اجتهاد مع وجود النص. There's no ijtihad with the wujud al-nas. So there's a fariq. The Quran says, إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. Like the prayer is fixed times, and they don't change. You can look at the prayer 100 years from now, and it's not going to change. It might change in nanoseconds if you're an astronomer because of the Earth's spin or something like that changing, but it's not going to change. Whereas the moon, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يَسْأَلُونَ عَنَ الْأَهِلَّةِ قُلْ هِيَ مَوَاقِيتُ لِلنَّاسِ, right? They're ways of timekeeping for people, but it doesn't have the exactitude of the prayer time. And that's why in the hadith, صُومُوا لِرُؤْيَتِهِ وَأَفْطِرُوا لِرُؤْيَتِهِ وَإِنْ غُمَّ عَلَيْكُمْ أو أغمي عليكم أو غمي عليكم أو عمي عليكم. They all came down in different narrations. عمي عليكم means you can't see it. It's completely hidden from your sight. Which if it's under the Danjon limit, this French astronomer determined clearly that the moon cannot be seen. There's no reflective light if it's lower than 7 degrees. Even with a telescope, unless you had some type of filter on it, right, that enabled you to see, but it doesn't reflect light below the Danjon limit. There's difference of opinion of why it doesn't. He thought it was because of the surface of the moon, that it was so rough that the light didn't reflect off of it. Other people say it's the atmospheric, the light's too bright from the sun. Anyway, you can't see it. So it could, عُمِي عَلَيْكُمْ. The hadith says, فَقْدُرُوا لَهُ أو فَقْدِرُوا لَهُ. There's two riwayah. فَقْدُرُوا لَهُ is calculate. That hadith is called mujmal, because that could mean different things. But there's another hadith which is called mubayyin, because in usul you have mujmal, which is, it's not as clear. Mubayyin clarifies it. So the other hadith, أكملوا العدة ثلاثين, complete 30 days, if it's hidden from you. Or if cloud, غم عليكم, يعني غمام is cloud, so if it's cloudy and you can't see it, عمي عليكم, it's blind, it's under the Danjon limit, you can't see it. So do that. So Imam al-Qarafi actually deals with this issue in his furuq. He explains why, and he was an astronomer that knew that you could actually calculate the new moon. this is not new science. People have calculated new moons for millennia, literally. I mean, the Babylonians were doing this. It's not new science. The Fatimids actually believe, they during the Fatimid rule in Egypt and Tunis and Libya, the Fatimids had moon began scientifically because they believed that you should use science, mathematics enables us to do this, and therefore we do it. So there is a period of time when a deviant sect actually did use calculations, and all of the ulama were against it. And it wasn't that they didn't think that it was possible. They knew it was possible to calculate the new moon. But they said clearly, this is about ru'ya, and it's not about calculation. So we can calculate the prayer times, but we can't calculate. So he wrote this book to show you the differences and how these differences will affect ruling. So one of the things he said is that it's not permissible for a mufti to give a fatwa, for instance, about talaq, until it's known that he's from that place. He knows the urf of the place. So in other words, he knows the customs of the people. Like for instance, you could say, you know what, we're through. It's over. And you mean divorce. If that's your intention, that's actually a type of divorce by urf. You don't have to say, anti taliq, you are divorced. You can just say, it's over. It's over, baby, you're out of here. You know, call your parents. So that's a type of divorce if that was the intention. So he has to know what the urf is, because he can't give a fatwa unless he knows that. If he's in another land, he can only give a fatwa based on what happens in his land. This is really important, because we get people coming from, for instance, Arabia. They come to the United States and people ask them questions. They don't know anything about the urf of the country. They don't know the problems of the people in that country. It has to be somebody that really understands that. They should at least know a foreign language. You know, they should know a European language, be reading in that area so they can understand the issues. And then he says, وَهَذِي قَاعِدَةٌ فِي جَمِيعِ الْأَحْكَامِ. This applies to all legal rulings, whether they're monetary rulings, whether they're related to rental problems and the benefits of that, or oaths, whether they're related to bequests or vows, right? All of these. And he says, this is something many fuqaha, many jurists are ignorant of. They neglect this meaning. This is one of our greatest usuli scholars. And he's saying the fuqaha get this wrong. So just because somebody is a faqih or an alim doesn't mean that they've always got it right. And he says that they find the early imams who they trust a lot, they wrote in their books fatawa based on their circumstances and their awa'id, their cultural norms, their traditions. فَأَفْتَهَا أُولَا الْمُتَأَخِرُونَ بِهَا. So the people come later, they read those old fatwas and they give responses from books that were written 1,000 years ago to apply to today. And he says, كانوا مخطئين, this is wrong. And خارقين الإجماع, they have broken with the ijma'. فإن الفتية بالحكم مبني على مدرك بعد زوال مدركه خلاف الإجماع. Because a fatwa that's based on something after that thing is gone is no longer applicable. And he says this is the ijma'. In other words, the illa, the hukm, al-hukmu yaduru ma'al illa, right? A legal ruling has to do with the rationale behind it. So if the rationale is gone, there's no more purpose of the legal ruling. In fatwas, this is a really important point. And it's a very common mistake. So, and a good example of that is, women who become Muslim in non-Muslim lands, and their husbands aren't Muslim, but their husbands, in some cases, even encourage them. And so this idea that you give a fatwa based on somebody who's, in a Muslim country, what they would say, and you apply it to that same circumstance, they're not compatible. And part of this is just fiqh al-waqi'. It's the fiqh of reality, right? As opposed to fiction, right? So he says ومن ذلك اللفظ الحرام والخلية والبرية ونحوهما مما هو مسطور لمالك أنه يلزمه بالطلاق الثلاث بناء على عادة كانت في زمانه. Like for instance in the books of the Malikiyya, they used to use these words like the khaliya, I have nothing to do with you, or ana barra'tu, it's over, like that. And Imam Malik said that these were, they counted for 3 divorces because they were mabtuta, they were like final. He says that's no longer applicable. We can't base it on that. وأكثر المالكية اليوم يفتي بلزوم الطلاق الثلاث. Most of the Malikis today, he's talking about in his place, they use these old fatwas and they say this is 3 divorces. And he said, بناء على عادة كانت في زمانه, based on a customary practice in his time that's no longer applicable. And he says, على المنقول في الكتب عن مالك وتلك العوائد قد زالت. These عوائد are over, these customs. فلا نجد أحدنا اليوم يطلق امرأته بالخلية والبرية. Nobody today uses these words to mean that. وله أيضا في الفرق 69 و200 يباح من إكرام الناس قسمان. And then what he calls what's permissible to honor people. There are 2 types. ما ورد به الشريعة كإفشاء السلام. Things that our sharia says, like spreading greeting, assalamu alaikum. That's part of our urf. The Muslims, we customarily, if we meet, we say assalamu alaikum, and then it's mandub to do that. But it's wajib to reply. So somebody has to reply, at least one person in the group. But it's recommended. This is the sharia is recommending that we do this. But if somebody does it, you have to reply, because if you don't, it's animosity you're expressing. He could take it wrong and think that, you don't want peace from me, I want peace for you, you don't want, okay, then here's war, right? So what he's, والثاني ما لم يرد في النصوص ولا كان في السلف لأنه لم يكن أسباب اعتباره بلزومه موجودة حينئذ وتجددت في عصرنا فتعين فعله لتجدد أسبابه كأنواع المخاطبات للملوك وأولي الرفعة من العظماء. So many people misunderstand this today. Like for instance, صاحب السمو. There's people that will take umbrage and say أعوذ بالله يا أخي ليش تقول صاحب السمو هو مو سامي ولا هو عالي ولا شيء هذا سافل. No, he's a hakim. And the urf is to call him صاحب السمو. Right? Or Sa'ada, or Ma'ali, al-Wazir. This is a'raf. And if you don't do them, you're breaking the a'raf, and it's offensive. And so you're creating problems. What did the Prophet write to the Romans? Ila azim al-Rom, the great one of Rome. The Prophet ﷺ, great with who? With his people. So the Prophet was speaking to him as he was spoken to. He didn't say, Ya haqir, Ya kafir. Really, he didn't say that. Ya ahmaq la tu'min billah. No. He said, ila azim al-Rom, to the great one of Rome. That's a name of Allah, al-Azim. So he's saying that these things like uli al-rif'a min al-udhama wa qiyam lil-ikram, getting up to honor somebody, this is all urf. The Prophet ﷺ said, man ahabba, right? The one, an yatamathal lahu, an-nasu bil-qiyam. The one who wants people to get up for him. That's another thing. And he said, لا تقوموا كما يقوم العاجم. Don't get up like the ajam get up. He's talking to the Arabs. In other words, look, this isn't your urf, so don't take somebody else's urf. But he didn't tell them they can't do that. He said they do that. That's their urf. That's not the urf of the Arabs. Don't take another urf, because humility is better. Right? But if the ajam do something, As long as they don't do it out of ibadah or something like that, khalas, it's their way they show ihtiram. There are things that the Arabs didn't do that it's sunnah for the Arabs not to do. And there's things that the Ajam, it's sunnah that they do things that the Arabs did. Not because it's an Arabian sunnah, but because the Prophet ﷺ did it as a practice. For instance, he ate with his hand. You can eat with a fork or a spoon. There's nothing that says you can't eat with a fork or a spoon. You can do that. But the Prophet ate with his hand. Now, if you eat with your hand, the sunnah is to use 3 fingers, not your whole hand. 3 fingers. That's the sunnah. And to use your right hand. So, if you're going to eat with your hand, then you should do it the way the Prophet ﷺ did it. It's encouraged to do that. And it would be makruh not to do that. وهذا كله ونحو من الأمور العادية. These are customary affairs, matters. لم تكن في السلف ونحن اليوم نفعلها. Today we do it. The Salaf didn't do it. وذلك جائز مأمور به وإن كان بدعة. These things are permissible even if they didn't, he means bid'ah lughawiyya. It wasn't in a practice of the Salaf. ولقد حضرت عند عز الدين ابن عبد السلام وكان من أعيان العلماء وأولي الجد في الدين. So he's of the maqam of jidd in the religion, this highest maqam. عز الدين ibn Abd salam. And this is Imam al-Qarafi speaking, right? He's writing this. في الدين وثبات على الكتاب والسنة. He followed the book and the sunnah. غير مكترث بالملوك فضلا عن غيرهم. He could care less about the kings, let alone others. In other words, he wasn't afraid of king. He would speak the truth, say the truth. He's famous for that. His mawqif in front of the ruler. He's famous for that. So he's saying he didn't care about the kings, let alone other people. So he's not saying this because he was worried or something like that. لا تأخذ في الله لومة لائم. He didn't worry concerning God. He didn't worry about other people blaming him. He would speak the truth and he could care less what other people thought. فَقُدِّمَ لَهُ سُؤَالٌ. A question was asked of him. فِي الْقِيَامِ الَّذِي أَحْدَثُهُ أَهْلُ زَمَانِنَا. About getting up, the way people of our time get up. مع أنه لم يكن في السلف هل يحرم. This wasn't amongst the Salaf. Is it prohibited because the Prophet didn't do it? فقال قال رسول الله لا تباغضوا ولا تقاطعوا ولا تدابروا. Didn't the Prophet say, don't hate one another, don't cut off ties with one another, don't turn your backs on one another. وترك القيام في هذا الوقت يفضي وترك القيام في هذا الوقت يفضي للمقاطعة والمدابرة فلو قيل بوجوبه ما كان بعيدا. And if you didn't do this today, it would lead to people never talking to you again. And so it's not far-fetched to say it's an obligation to stand. This is Izzuddin ibn Abd salam. It's not far-fetched to say it's an obligation to stand. Because the ulfa and the unity of the Muslims is much more important. And this is why he said that sometimes leaving a sunnah, if it's going to lead to something worse, would be the sunnah in that situation. هذا نص ما كتب وهو معنى قول عمر بن عبد العزيز تحدث للناس أقضية. So things happen with people and then the responses come based on that. And this is one of the reasons why the Prophet said, my death is good for you. Because تحدثون فيحدث لكم. You do things and then Allah responds. So when I die, wahy's cut off. So this doesn't get too overwhelming for you. Right? Because it's a rahmah to have أصل الأشياء الإباحة. If there were too many rules, we would get overwhelmed. وهذا بشرط ألا تستبيح محرما ولا تترك واجبا. But this is conditional upon neither making what is haram permissible nor leaving what is an obligation. And this is really important because one of the things that we have to be very careful about in our religion, because this is an age where the Abrahamic faiths are breaking down. what the occultists call the age of Horus, the one-eyed one. That one of the really sinister occultists of the early 20th century, who died in 1947, and he's very popular amongst artists and things like that. He said that that we are entering into this age of Horus. You know, they call it the age of Aquarius. And what preceded us was the age of Pisces. And that was the age of Isis, interestingly enough. And Isis is this Egyptian god that imposes this patriarchal rule and treats us like children. And we have to follow them and follow these rules. And if we break these rules, we go outside of this patriarchal father god. But now the age of Horus is coming, who's the son. So it's the age of the child. And the child is free to do what it wants. So the only real law now is do whatever you want, right? Do whatever you want. And as long as you don't hurt anybody. You can hurt yourself. And obviously you can hurt somebody else if it's consensual, but you don't hurt anybody intentionally, right? So this is the idea. So we have to be very careful that we do not change our religion because of the zeitgeist. So there's people that will say, what's wrong with this? Love wins, right? No, there's certain things our religion is very clear about. And one of the most important things one of my teachers told me, Sheikh Bashir al-Shaqfa, he's a great scholar from Syria, Allah yahfaduhu, a really brilliant faqih. One of the things that he told me, he said, in America, just tell them, the Muslims there, whatever they do, don't make the haram halal. He said, because as long as, he said, in this religion, no matter what you do, the door of tawbah is open to you. But once you make the haram halal, the door closes. It closes.